Victor was a man who carried the weight of an indescribable pain, one that no amount of his fortune could ease. Wealthy and successful, he had everything, except the most important thing, his daughter, Sophie, who disappeared when she was just 4 years old. That emptiness echoed through every corner of his luxurious mansion, a silence that reminded him daily of how cruel life could be, even to the most privileged. He would look at the antique clock on the wall, a gift from his late wife, and feel that time did not heal. On the contrary, it seemed to mock him, deepening his sorrow. The day Sophie disappeared was etched in his memory like a scar that never healed. It was a sunny day, the sky a brilliant blue promising moments of joy. They were at the park, and Sophie's laughter was music to his ears. But in the blink of an eye, one moment of distraction, fate took a sharp turn. Sophie was gone, and with her his reason for living. Victor would never forget the screams, the frantic search, and the crushing sense of helplessness that consumed him. The investigations came swiftly, followed by search efforts and relentless media coverage. Victor put his vast fortune into motion, hiring the best detectives and offering astronomical rewards. Yet money, his faithful ally in so many endeavors, proved useless against this mystery. Months turned into years, and hope became a fragile thread. But Victor, with his characteristic stubbornness, never let that thread break entirely. He knew, or at least needed to believe, that Sophie was still alive. In the silence of his lonely nights, he revisited every detail of the case, every lead that had ended in a dead end. Sophie's face, once so vivid in photographs, was imprinted on his memory, but also began to blur with the uncertainty of time. What would she look like now? Had she changed? Would she still remember him? These questions haunted him like shadows, transforming his mansion into an emotional prison. Despite all the pain, Victor refused to give up. Finding Sophie had become his life's mission. Neither the advice of friends nor the pitying glances of those who knew him could shake his resolve. For him, giving up meant accepting that she was gone forever, and that was something he simply could not do. His days began and ended with a silent promise. He would find her. There was a mysterious force that drove him, a paternal instinct that wouldn't let him rest. In moments of despair, he clung to the happy memories he had of Sophie, the way she held his hand or the sweet way she called him Daddy. These memories were like a compass, pointing toward a future where they would be reunited. Victor believed destiny had more in store for them. But the truth was that time was unforgiving. The people around him began to move on, to forget, but Victor couldn't. He knew life had taken something precious from him, something no achievement or financial success could ever replace. While others admired his wealth and power, all he saw was the growing void within him. He didn't need more riches. He needed Sophie. This silent pain was both his fuel and his undoing. On one hand, it kept him moving, focused on his goal. On the other, it drained his energy, turning every business triumph into something hollow. Victor knew many saw him as a pillar of strength, a symbol of resilience, but few understood the broken man behind the successful millionaire. No matter how much society tried to convince him it was time to let go, Victor never wavered. He believed that a father's love had no expiration date. And though he didn't know how or when, he held an unshakable certainty. Sophie was still alive. That belief sustained him, a fragile yet unbreakable thread of hope. Sophie was a young woman who seemed to carry a secret even she couldn't quite define. There was something in her gaze that conveyed both strength and uncertainty, as if her soul held fragments of a story she couldn't fully access. An artist by passion, her paintings had something unique, almost magical about them. Among all her works, one symbol appeared repeatedly, a star. She couldn't explain where the inspiration came from, but she felt it was deeply connected to her essence. Her life had been filled with love, but also with unanswered questions. Rescued from a precarious situation as a child, Sophie grew up in a safe and nurturing environment. The family who adopted her was wealthy, generous, and deeply devoted to protecting her. They never revealed how they found her or the details of what happened before she came into their lives. For Sophie, they were her family, her home. Yet deep inside, something felt incomplete. The star she painted over and over was a constant reminder of a memory she couldn't quite decipher. Since she was little, she'd dreamed of a man holding her hand and drawing that shape in the air. There was no face in her memory, only the feeling of safety that figure gave her. This vague recollection followed her like a whisper, almost like a forgotten melody you hum, but can't quite finish. Her adoptive parents, always attentive, made sure she lacked for nothing. They encouraged her artistic passion and gave her the best education money could buy. Yet Sophie couldn't shake an inexplicable sense of disconnection. Though she was grateful for what she had, there was a void that neither luxury nor affection seemed to fill. It was as if she knew there was more, a missing piece in her story. She was a mystery even to herself. Her paintings weren't just a form of expression. They were a reflection of her subconscious, an attempt to unlock something hidden deep in her mind. And though she didn't realize it, her work was beginning to draw attention. The stars she painted had a childlike simplicity, yet carried an emotional weight that captivated anyone who saw them. They were beautiful and enigmatic just like her. Slowly, Sophie began to make a name for herself in the art world. Her exhibitions drew people fascinated by her creations, but she avoided the spotlight. She preferred to remain anonymous, letting her work speak for her. When asked about the meaning of the stars, she would simply smile and say, "They're part of me." To others, it was a poetic response. To her, it was a truth she didn't yet fully understand. Her adoptive parents, despite their deep love for her, felt the quiet distance between them. It wasn't a lack of love, but the absence of a truth they didn't know how to share. The story of how they found her was delicate, filled with nuances they feared might hurt Sophie. And so, the silence about her past remained, a nonverbal pact between them. Sophie, for her part, sought meaning in her life through her art. While many saw her success as proof of innate talent, she saw her work as a personal journey. Each brushstroke was an attempt to reach a part of herself beyond her conscious grasp. The star wasn't just a symbol. It was a call, something that seemed to point to an origin she had yet to uncover. Though her life was, in many ways, perfect, Sophie knew she didn't have all the answers. The restlessness she carried was both her greatest strength and her greatest weakness. Deep down, she knew there was something more, something she needed to find to feel whole. And though she didn't know it yet, fate was already conspiring to deliver those answers in a way that would change her life forever. Victor had developed a peculiar relationship with solitude. The vast halls of his mansion echoed with the footsteps of anyone who dared to cross them, though that rarely happened. One day, a friend insisted he step out of his seclusion and attend a cultural event. "It's an art exhibition," his friend said. "It'll do you good." Reluctantly, Victor agreed, not out of any real interest in art, but because his friend's voice carried a genuine concern he couldn't ignore. When he arrived at the gallery, Victor felt out of place. People chatted animatedly, admiring paintings with expressions of awe. He, however, wandered aimlessly through the rooms, feeling like an intruder in a world where he didn't belong. Then, as he turned a corner, something stopped him in his tracks. It was a simple, almost minimalist painting, a star. But it wasn't just any star, it was the star he used to draw for Sophie when she was little. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Victor moved closer to the painting, examining every detail. There was no doubt in his mind. This symbol was unique, unmistakable. The memory hit him like a wave. He could see himself sitting next to Sophie, sketching that very star on paper, teaching her how to draw its lines with precision. His heart raced, and his eyes began to well with tears. Could it be a coincidence? He knew it wasn't. Struggling to control his emotions, Victor sought information about the artist. He discovered that the painting was part of a series signed by someone called S. Star. The name was cryptic, but Victor felt a connection. He asked the gallery curator about the artist, but the answer was disappointing. "She's very private," the curator explained. "Avoids any kind of publicity. All we know is that she lives nearby and works in anonymity." Victor was not the kind of man to accept vague answers, especially not in the face of something so significant. He felt a sense of urgency he hadn't felt in years, a spark reigniting his determination. He left the gallery with a newfound purpose, to find this mysterious artist and uncover what she knew. Deep down, he already believed that S. Star was not just an artist. She was Sophie. In the days that followed, Victor threw himself into the search. He started by examining the exhibition catalog, poring over every piece signed by S. Star. The paintings seemed to tell a story, not just of stars, but of childhood, of bonds that, though invisible, were unbreakable. To Victor, every brushstroke on those canvases was a clue, a map leading him back to his lost daughter. Hiring a detective felt like a natural next step. Victor was no stranger to investigations, though none had ever borne fruit in the past. This time, however, something was different. The pieces seemed to be falling into place. The detective, a seasoned professional, took the case with interest. "This artist might be the key," Victor told him, handing over everything he had learned so far. While waiting for updates from the detective, Victor continued studying S. Star's works. He began to notice patterns he hadn't seen before. Beyond the star, there were subtle elements that seemed like references to Sophie's childhood memories. A swing, a tree with red flowers, a pair of hands drawn in an almost abstract style. It was as if Sophie, without realizing it, had been leaving breadcrumbs for him. The gallery became a touchstone for Victor. He returned often, hoping the artist might appear. Though he never had the luck to encounter her, he felt he was getting closer. Each visit reaffirmed that he was on the right path. And with every new piece he discovered, his conviction deepened. This artist wasn't a stranger. Victor kept his suspicions to himself, sharing them only with the detective. The fear of raising false hopes was paralyzing. But deep down, he had already made up his mind. There was no room for doubt. He believed that, after all these years, fate had finally decided to conspire in his favor. For the first time in a long while, hope felt less like a burden and more like a force driving him forward. The first report from the detective came quickly. S. Star is a local artist, the man informed him. She works out of a small studio and doesn't grant interviews. To Victor, this was an invitation to dig deeper. He asked the detective to investigate further, focusing on any details that might link the artist to Sophie's past. Each piece of this new investigation felt like an echo of the past, but now, Victor was ready to face whatever answers came. As he waited for more information, Victor reflected on the coincidence that had brought him to the gallery. He wasn't a man who believed in chance, but something inside him whispered that more was at play than simple luck. It felt as though life was giving him a second chance, one last challenge, before he could find peace. And he was willing to face any obstacle to seize this opportunity. Victor knew he was treading on fragile ground. If his suspicions were wrong, it would devastate him further. But at the same time, he felt the truth was within reach, so close he could almost touch it. Every new clue was a spark, and those sparks were beginning to ignite a flame he could no longer ignore. He was resolute. He would find S. Star, no matter the cost. The detective wasted no time diving deeper into the investigation of S. Star. The initial findings confirmed what Victor already suspected. The artist was a reclusive figure, known only within select circles of collectors. She rarely appeared at events and preferred to sell her work through intermediaries. "It's unusual," the detective remarked, "but not impossible to trace." Those words reignited a spark of hope in Victor. Clues began to surface in small fragments. The detective discovered that S. Star used a modest studio as her creative base, located in a quiet part of the city. It was an unassuming space, with no signs or markers of its significance. To Victor, this information was more than progress. It was a sign that he was finally closing in on something tangible. Victor decided to visit the location himself. He knew caution was essential, but his anxiety was consuming him. When he arrived, he found a modest building, almost overshadowed by the grandeur of the surrounding structures. He couldn't bring himself to enter, fearing a premature encounter might scare the artist away. Instead, he watched from a distance, waiting for any sign that could confirm his suspicions. As the detective dug deeper, Victor learned more about S. Star. Her simple lifestyle stood in stark contrast to the prices her paintings fetched on the market. She seems disconnected from money, the detective said, showing Victor photos of the studio's interior. Walls covered with paintings, brushes scattered about, and a single wooden chair in the corner. The description intrigued Victor. It was nothing like what he expected from someone he believed shared his blood. Then, a pivotal discovery shifted the course of the investigation. The detective found records of an informal adoption involving a wealthy family who had taken in a young girl with no documentation years ago. This information made Victor pause. He knew Sophia's story was shrouded in uncertainty, but this new piece fit painfully well. The connection was clear. The family who adopted the artist had rescued Sophia from something terrible. Hearing this revelation, Victor felt a surge of conflicting emotions. On one hand, gratitude. The adoptive family had given Sophia a life that might otherwise have been destroyed. On the other, sorrow. They couldn't have known of his existence, or the void her loss had left in his life. Victor knew he couldn't approach them impulsively. He needed more evidence before revealing the truth. The detective continued with care, piecing together the adoptive family's history. They had found Sophia in delicate circumstances and, rather than report her to authorities, chose to take her in. It was an act of compassion driven by fear that returning her to the system might put her back in harm's way. While well-intentioned, this decision had obscured Sophia's true origins for all these years. Victor felt an enormous weight as he processed this information. He couldn't fault the family, but he also couldn't ignore that Sophia had grown up unaware of her true identity. He needed a careful approach, something that could piece together this fractured story without causing unnecessary pain. Meanwhile, the detective discovered that Sophia would be attending an upcoming art event. This was the opportunity Victor had been waiting for. The news of the event filled Victor with both hope and fear. It could be his chance to finally see Sophia up close, but he also dreaded how she might react upon learning the truth. In the days leading up to the event, Victor immersed himself in memories of Sophia, trying to imagine who she had become, how she had grown. Time seemed to slow, each minute heavy with unbearable anticipation. On the day of the event, Victor prepared as if for a life-or-death mission. He dressed elegantly but modestly and arrived early, determined to take in everything. The gallery was bustling, but his focus was singular. The works of S. Star. Each painting seemed laden with emotion, with memories he recognized without fully understanding why. He knew he was getting closer. Victor positioned himself strategically, striving to remain unnoticed. His eyes scanned the room repeatedly, searching for a face he might no longer recognize. Then he saw her. A young woman with loose hair and a contemplative expression stood at the back, speaking with a small group. Something about her felt familiar. He almost couldn't contain his emotion. Could it be her? He hesitated. Approaching her directly felt like an enormous risk. What if he was mistaken? What if she rejected him? These thoughts paralyzed him. Instead, Victor observed from afar, taking in every detail. The young woman seemed unaffected by the gallery's bustle, focused entirely on her work. To Victor, that moment was a mix of pain and hope. He knew the next step would be critical. The detective, who had been shadowing him discreetly, confirmed. That was S. Star. Victor took a deep breath, battling the urge to approach her then and there. He knew he needed more time, more certainty. That night, he left the gallery without making contact, but with a clear plan: to continue the investigation until he was fully prepared for the reunion. As he walked away from the event, Victor felt as though his life was on the brink of change. He knew he was one step away from something monumental, something that could bring him both joy and pain. But most of all, he felt closer to Sophia than he had in years. It was as if fate was finally opening the doors he had sought for so long. Sophie had no idea that night would change her life forever. As visitors in the gallery admired her work, she felt a mix of satisfaction and discomfort. Though grateful for the recognition, there was always something that made her feel out of place. Even at the height of her artistic expression, there was a gap within her that no amount of praise could fill. Across the gallery, Victor continued to watch. Every gesture Sophie made filled him with conflicting emotions: joy at seeing her alive and sorrow for the time they had lost. He knew he couldn't wait much longer to act. Sensing Victor's hesitation, the detective decided to intervene. "I can try speaking with her," he offered. Victor agreed, but insisted it be done delicately. The detective approached Sophie casually, complimenting her paintings before asking a few subtle questions about her life. "You seem deeply connected to the past," he said, gesturing toward a star on one of her canvases. Sophie smiled, but didn't answer directly. To her, the star was more instinct than a clear memory. "It's just something that's always been with me," she replied, unaware of how much truth her words carried. During the conversation, the detective found an opportunity to mention Victor's name. At the sound of it, something shifted in Sophie's expression. The name felt oddly familiar, though she couldn't place it in any context of her current life. She tried to mask her confusion with a polite smile, but felt an unshakable unease she couldn't explain. In the following days, the detective gave Sophie something that would alter her perception of herself forever: a simple envelope containing an old photo of Victor with a young girl, her, at 4 years old. There was also a letter explaining the events of her childhood, including the moment that had forever changed her life. Sophie read the letter repeatedly, trying to absorb the truth it revealed. At first, she refused to believe it. How could it be true? She had a family, a history. But as days passed, fragments of memories began to surface. Small flashes of a life she had forgotten. The star. A man's voice calling her "my little star." The smell of a sunny park. It was as if something deeply buried in her mind was finally awakening. Sophie's internal conflict was overwhelming. On one hand, she felt immense loyalty and gratitude to the family that raised her. On the other, there was an undeniable need to understand her true origin. She spent sleepless nights staring at the photo of Victor, trying to decipher her feelings. Who was this man? Was he really her father? And if he was, what did that mean for her life now? Gradually, Sophie began to accept the possibility that the story the detective told her was true. She knew she had to confront these truths, no matter how painful. She decided to ask for a meeting with the man claiming to be her father, not because she fully believed him, but because she needed answers. It was a step she knew would change everything. When the detective brought the news to Victor, he was torn between joy and anxiety. He had waited for this moment for decades, but now that it was so close, the fear of rejection consumed him. He agreed to the meeting, but requested it be held in a quiet, private place. He wanted their first conversation to be free of tension or distractions. Sophie arrived at the meeting carrying a mix of nerves and curiosity. When she saw Victor for the first time, a chill ran down her spine. There was something in his eyes that felt strangely familiar. Victor, for his part, could barely hold back tears. She was everything he had hoped for and more. But he knew he needed to give her the space to process everything. The conversation began hesitantly, with Sophie asking short questions and Victor answering carefully. He told her stories from her childhood, memories she didn't know she had, but that began to resonate within her. The star, the phrase, "my little star," everything started to make sense. The truth was there, yet it still felt surreal. Sophie didn't know how to react. Part of her wanted to embrace him, to acknowledge this man as her father. Another part felt as though she was betraying the family who had raised her. She asked about the years he spent searching for her, and Victor answered with honesty. He spoke of the pain, the determination, and the hope that never left him. His words were both comforting and overwhelming. By the end of their meeting, Sophie didn't have all the answers, but she knew her life would never be the same. She thanked Victor for his honesty and asked for time to process everything. He understood and promised to give her the space she needed. But deep down they both knew this was only the beginning of something much greater. As she returned home, Sophie felt a mix of relief and unease. The truth was like a puzzle that was beginning to take shape, though pieces were still missing. She knew the next step was inevitable, confronting her adoptive family and understanding their role in the story. It was a journey that promised to be as painful as it was liberating. Victor, on the other hand, felt his hope finally had a purpose. He knew the path to full reconciliation would be long, but he was willing to wait. For him, every moment with Sophie, even uncertain ones, was a victory. The star that had guided him for so many years now seemed to be leading him home. Victor was nervous. Although his initial reunion with Sophie had already taken place, it still felt like a distant dream. This time, he wanted it to be special, intimate, a moment to mark the beginning of something new between them. He chose a quiet spot, a park with a small wooded area, a place that faintly reminded him of the happy moments they had shared before everything changed. Sophie, on the other hand, felt torn. She knew this meeting was important, but she still carried the emotional weight of discovering a part of herself that had been buried for so long. When she arrived at the park and saw Victor sitting on a bench, his expression calm yet filled with expectation, something inside her warmed. There was something familiar about him, something she couldn't quite ignore. The conversation started slowly, almost shyly. Victor didn't want to push her, so he began with small stories from her childhood. He spoke about the day she learned to ride a bike and the time they stayed up late looking at stars. He mentioned the star he used to draw for her, and for the first time, Sophie felt it wasn't just a vague memory, but a real connection to her past. Sophie listened closely, absorbing each word like pieces of a puzzle. As much as she still felt loyal to the family who had raised her, she couldn't deny the authenticity of Victor's stories. The details were so intimate, so unique, that only someone who had truly been there could know them. She began to relax, letting her emotional defenses fall little by little. Sensing her openness, Victor spoke about the years he spent searching for her and the unwavering hope that had sustained him. He didn't try to romanticize the pain, but was honest about how her absence had shaped his life. "I always believed you were alive," he said. "There were moments when everyone told me to move on, but I knew I couldn't. You were my little star, and I couldn't let that light go out." His words struck a deep chord in Sophie. She didn't know how to respond, but she felt that Victor wasn't just trying to win her over with sentimental stories. He was opening up genuinely, sharing a pain she was only now beginning to understand. For the first time, she felt she could trust him, even though she still needed time to process everything. The most emotional moment came when Victor pulled an old notebook from his pocket, its pages yellowed with age. It was the notebook he used to draw in for her when she was little. He opened it to a specific page where he had drawn a star years ago. "I kept this," he said, his voice trembling. "It was my way of keeping you close, even when everything felt lost." Sophie took the notebook with trembling hands. She looked at the drawing of the star, and suddenly, everything made sense. It was the same star she had been painting over and over, without fully knowing why. Tears began to stream down her face, not out of sadness, but relief. It felt as though a part of her soul, long dormant, had finally awakened. They spent hours talking in that park. Sophie asked questions about her biological mother and about what her life had been like before everything changed. Victor answered with honesty, sharing happy memories and painful moments alike. He held nothing back, believing Sophie deserved to know the full truth, no matter how difficult. Each answer seemed to draw them closer, as though they were rebuilding a bond long thought lost. At the end of the meeting, Sophie looked at Victor with a mix of emotion and acceptance. "I don't know how to deal with all of this yet," she said, "but I think I'm ready to try." Victor smiled, holding back tears. To him, those words were all he needed to hear. He knew the road ahead would be long, but now he had something he hadn't had in decades: hope. As Sophie said goodbye, promising to stay in touch, Victor remained on the bench, gazing at the sky. The stars were beginning to appear, and for the first time, he felt truly connected to his daughter. The journey wasn't over, but this moment was a milestone, a starting point for something bigger. Sophie, on her way home, felt lighter. It was as if she had finally found the missing piece of her life. She knew there were still many emotions to confront, especially with her adoptive family. But now she had a new perspective. There was something powerful in knowing where she came from, in finally understanding the truth. Victor and Sophie left that park knowing everything had changed. He felt as though his little star was finally finding her way back home, while she felt she had discovered a new path, one that connected her past and future at the same time. The promise of rebuilding their bond shone brightly, like a light on the horizon. The days following the reunion were marked by intense emotions for both Victor and Sophie. He felt that a void within him was beginning to fill, but he also knew their relationship was still fragile, like a newly built bridge that needed time to solidify. Sophie, on the other hand, was navigating a whirlwind of feelings: gratitude for the family that had raised her, curiosity about her biological father, and a mixture of doubt and hope about how these parts of her life could coexist. Victor made a point of being patient. He knew pressuring her would be a mistake, so he chose to respect Sophie's pace. Instead of trying to be constantly present, he focused on small gestures, an occasional message, a subtle invitation for coffee, or even sending her a book he thought she might like. Each act was his way of showing her that he was there for her, while also respecting her space. Sophie began to realize that Victor wasn't just a man seeking redemption. He was a father who had never given up, even when hope seemed lost. That touched something deep within her. Still, her loyalty to the family that had raised her made her hesitant. She didn't want them to feel as though they were being replaced, because deep down, she knew her love for them was real and unwavering. To process her conflicting emotions, Sophie turned to her art. Her paintings began to subtly change, reflecting the new layers of her unfolding story. She painted not just stars, but also landscapes that symbolized connections, trees with intertwined roots, skies full of constellations that seemed to tell stories. Each piece became a way to process what she was living through, a voice for emotions she couldn't yet put into words. When Victor saw Sophie's new paintings, he felt as though he was being invited into her journey. He knew these works were reflections of her feelings, and it moved him deeply. One day, he offered to buy one of her canvases, but Sophie gently refused. "These aren't for sale," she said with a smile, "but I can paint something just for you." To Victor, that gesture was more valuable than any artwork he could have purchased. As they rebuilt their relationship, they began sharing stories from their lives. Victor spoke of the years he spent searching for her, the false leads, the moments of despair that nearly broke him. Sophie, in turn, opened up about her childhood with her adoptive family, the moments of love and security that had shaped her into who she was. These conversations brought them closer, showing that, despite everything, both had found strength in their journeys. The theme of gratitude for her adoptive family often came up in their conversations. Sophie wanted Victor to understand that, while she had a past with him, the parents who raised her had been a crucial part of her life. Victor not only accepted this, but also expressed his appreciation. "I'm forever grateful to them for taking care of you," he said during one conversation, "and I'll never try to take that away from you." Those words eased a weight Sophie had been carrying in her heart. Time began to work in their favor. Visits between Victor and Sophie became more frequent, and each meeting was an opportunity to build something new. They laughed, shared memories, and even began making tentative plans for the future. One day, as they walked through a park, Sophie remarked, "I never thought I'd have two families, but maybe it's something I can learn to accept." For Victor, those words were a milestone. Sophie started to see that reconnecting with Victor didn't mean severing ties with her adoptive family. Instead, it was a way to expand her understanding of herself. She decided to open up to her adoptive parents, sharing the story of Victor and the impact he was having on her life. The conversation was emotional, but filled with understanding. Her adoptive parents were surprised but also happy for her. "You'll always be our daughter," they told her, "but learning more about your story can only enrich who you are." For Victor, this moment was a sign that they were on the right path. He had never wanted to compete for Sophie's love. All he wanted was to be a part of her life. And now, with the blessing of her adoptive family, he felt that a new chapter was beginning. Their relationship was still under construction, but its foundations were strong. And for Victor, that was more than he could have ever hoped for. After opening her heart to her adoptive family, Sophie felt an enormous weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time, it seemed as though all the pieces of her life were beginning to align. She started speaking more openly about Victor with her adoptive parents, sharing the stories he had told her about her childhood. They listened with genuine interest, sensing that, despite the complexity of the situation, this was something positive for Sophie. Victor, in turn, was relieved to hear that Sophie's adoptive family was handling the situation well. He knew their support was crucial for Sophie to feel whole. "I never wanted to take her away from them," he confided to the detective, who continued to stay involved in the case. "I just want her to have everything she deserves: love, security, and the freedom to know her true story." As the weeks passed, Victor and Sophie found new ways to connect on a deeper level. One day, Victor invited her to visit his mansion. He hesitated before extending the invitation, worried she might feel uncomfortable with his wealth or the memories the house held. To his surprise, Sophie accepted with curiosity, saying she wanted to learn more about him and what had kept him strong all those years. The visit to the mansion was a turning point. Sophie walked through the grand hallways, taking in the walls adorned with artwork and old photographs. She stopped in front of a large painting of a star that Victor had commissioned years ago to keep her memory alive. "I never stopped believing you'd come back," he said, his eyes fixed on the piece. Sophie smiled, lightly touching the frame. "I think, in some way, I always knew something was waiting for me." During the visit, Victor showed Sophie the room that had been hers. Despite the years that had passed, he had kept the space almost untouched. The small closet still held a few toys and clothes from when she was a child, and the bed was covered with the quilt she used to love. Sophie felt a pang in her heart as she took it all in. It was like staring into a life she didn't know she had lost. After that day, Sophie began to see Victor differently. He wasn't just a man trying to reclaim lost time. He was someone who had devoted his entire life to loving her, even from afar. This realization prompted her to open up more. She began sharing her insecurities, her fears, and even moments when she doubted herself as an artist. Victor listened patiently, offering advice rooted in his own journey of resilience. At the same time, Sophie noticed her art evolving yet again. Now, the stars she painted carried a new meaning. They were no longer just symbols of a forgotten past, but representations of hope and reconnection. When Victor saw one of her new pieces, he was deeply moved. "You haven't just found your story," he said. "You're turning it into something beautiful." Their relationship also reshaped how they both viewed the concept of family. Victor came to understand that love wasn't exclusive and that Sophie's adoptive family's presence didn't diminish his role in her life. Sophie, in turn, realized it was possible to love both families in different ways without betraying either. This mutual understanding cemented the bond between them. One day, while walking together in a park, Sophie made an unexpected proposal. "What if we use our story to help others?" she asked. Intrigued, Victor asked what she had in mind. Sophie explained that she wanted to create a foundation to support children who, like her, had been found in difficult circumstances. Victor loved the idea. For him, it was a way to transform their pain into something positive, a legacy that would unite their journeys in a meaningful way. Victor and Sophie worked together to bring their envisioned foundation to life. Named Stars Reunited, the initiative was dedicated to helping children separated from their families, providing emotional, legal, and financial support. For Victor, every resolved case felt like a small victory, while Sophie saw the foundation as a way to use her own journey as inspiration for others. The foundation quickly gained recognition, drawing attention from influential figures and the public alike. Victor used his resources to ensure the initiative had the necessary reach, while Sophie, with her artistic talent, organized events and exhibitions, donating the proceeds to the project. Each new success of the foundation stood as proof that even in the hardest circumstances, there was room for hope and reconciliation. One day, during the opening of a new community center supported by the foundation, Victor and Sophie stood side by side, addressing a crowd. Victor, visibly moved, spoke about the importance of never giving up on the people we love. Sophie shared how learning her true story had changed her life and how their reunion had given new meaning to her art. Their words resonated deeply with the audience, who saw in them a powerful example of love and perseverance. At the end of the day, Victor and Sophie returned to the same park where they had reunited for the first time. Sitting on a bench, they watched the stars begin to light up the night sky. "You know," Sophie said, pointing upward, "our stars were always there. We just needed to find them again." Victor smiled, taking her hand. "And now that we have, we'll never lose each other again." Their story wasn't just about a father and daughter. It was about the power of hope, forgiveness, and the human ability to create new beginnings even after great loss. For those who witnessed their journey, whether up close or from afar, the message was clear. True love has the power to transform, to heal, and to illuminate even the darkest moments. The star that had once connected them now shone brighter than ever, symbolizing not only what they had lost, but everything they had found. This story reminds us that even in our darkest times, love can be the guiding light that leads us back to what truly matters. Do you believe it's possible to rebuild lost connections, even after so much time has passed? Have you ever wondered how small gestures can transform lives, just as the painting of a star transformed Victor and Sophie's? If this story of reconnection and resilience touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who needs a bit of hope today. And, of course, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to keep discovering inspiring stories like this one. Your support is what keeps these stories alive and powerful. Before you go, check out the next video appearing on your screen now. I'm sure it will move you deeply and help you see new possibilities. Together, let's transform stories into lessons and inspiration. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story. Until then,